Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 484 for the 28th of Adar in a regular year. So if you've been following along the podcast for the past little while, then you may have noticed that there's been a really strong emphasis that the Alter Rebbe is placing on physical action. Yesterday's podcast was devoted to the whole idea of the power of giving tzedakah, the power of charity, which is sort of like the epitome of physicality. Arguably the most physical of all the mitzvahs because it involves your entire self. Like your entire self was involved, your entire being was involved in making that money. If you worked for your money, and even if you didn't work for your money, if you inherited the money or you won the money or whatever, we use money to buy things usually for ourselves, to support ourselves, to give pleasure to ourselves in many different ways. And instead, when we choose to use that money that we could have used on ourselves to spend on others, to give charity, this is a way of really giving over our whole self for God. So this has been the theme for a while. It's just this idea, the focus on physicality, the idea that the whole purpose of the world is to make a dwelling place for God here in this physical world. So now the question comes about, and this is going to be the subject of today's episode, is why is it then that Jews are called the people of the book? So the Alter Rebbe doesn't ask that question in that exact phraseology, but that's the basic idea. Like we know that what are Jews known for throughout the world? Sure, Jews are known for being very kind and being very active and stuff like that. But over and above all else, what do people think of stereotypically when people tend to think of Jews? They think of Jews as being smart, right? There's so many intellectual accomplishments. There's like this, crazy disproportionate amount of Nobel Prize winners that are Jews. I just looked it up. It's 20% Nobel Prizes have been given to Jewish people, which is crazy given the proportion of Jews in the world. It's really insane. We know that. Well, it's not politically correct to mention this perhaps, but Ashkenazi Jews pretty consistently score higher on IQ tests than other people in the world. And one of the explanations for this is that rather than it being simply a case of, genetic inherent superiority, it actually has more of an epigenetic component to it, meaning to say that this is a product of our long-standing history and our culture of emphasis on intellectualism, of emphasis within Judaism, traditional Judaism, on Torah study, on sitting in yeshivas, studying, poring over Gemaras for hours and hours and hours, which if you've ever opened up a Gemara and tried to learn it, you see is really a crazy intellectual endeavor that surpasses any crossword puzzle or mind game that's out there. So there definitely is, we all understand there's this huge focus on intellectualism within Judaism, this huge focus specifically on learning Torah. So that's what today's portion is going to address, is this idea that as much as physical mitzvahs and all the more so giving tzedakah, especially the mitzvah of giving charity, really supersedes everything. And it is kind of like the main point. We do have to address this idea of Torah study. We have to address the great value that is placed on Torah study and what that's all about. What did the sages mean when they taught, as we'll see, that Torah study is a very big deal and that Torah study in its own way actually supersedes all the other mitzvahs. So how do we reconcile these two things? What's this all about? So today we're going to really give that focus to Torah study, and we're going to talk about what it is that Torah study actually has that is superior to all the other mitzvahs, even the mitzvah of giving tzedakah. So as in many things in Judaism, it really depends on what angle you take, what vantage point you're looking at. And so we'll come to learn that from a certain vantage point, indeed, we can say that Torah study is the most superior of all the mitzvahs. And in brief, and we'll get into the text in just a minute, in brief, we'll see that the Alter Rebbe actually brings up two ways through which Torah study is superior than any other mitzvah. The first way that Torah study is superior to all the other mitzvahs is that only Torah study involves the minds, the intellect in a full way. And when as we've spoken about in the Tanya, we know that we're made up of different faculties. We know that we have, three garments of our soul. We have the garments of thought, speech, and action. And then we also have, look at our soul powers, we have three intellectual faculties, and then we have 7 emotive faculties. And so when it comes to our emotive faculties, we know that our emotive faculties are very difficult to change. Like this, the whole subject of the Tanya is this idea that, it's the book of the Beinoni, which what that means to be a Beinoni is it's sort of like this realization that we're never going to be a tzaddik. We're never going to change our core nature. We're never going to change our impulse to want to do physical things. The best we can do is to have a sense of control over our impulses, to be able to live life in a more mindful way. But the mind, on the other hand, the intellect, on the other hand, perhaps ironically, is something that we have a little bit more control over. So while we can't control our impulses, we can control what we do with our thoughts. We can control what we choose to focus on. This is sort of like the angle that cognitive behavioral therapy takes, is that it really starts with your mind. It really starts with telling yourself different things, focusing on different things. What you focus on is what's going to guide your life in terms of your intellect, versus what you're feeling, that we have a lot less control over. So that's the one way that Torah study is superior to mitzvahs. And because Torah study it focuses on the mind, versus mitzvahs don't have that same focus. Mitzvahs are really more, I guess we could say, emotion-based or action-based. And then the second reason why Torah study is superior to mitzvahs is because the mitzvahs are likened to being the limbs of God, as we've spoken about before. The 248 positive commandments are the limbs of the king. The 365 negative commandments, prohibitions, are the sinews of God. Versus when we talk about Torah, what is Torah? Torah is unified with God. Torah is like the mind of God. So it's just like if you think about a person, and you think about a person and their organs and their limbs, and each part of them, each limb is definitely an essential component of the person. Really, in a more essential space, if we, what is the driving force behind our movements, behind our feelings? What do we feel with? We've spoken about this in other places in the Tanya. When you touch an object, you touch it with your hand, it's actually not your hand that's feeling the sensation of the object. It's actually your brain that's translating this touch to something perceptible by you. Also, if you move your hand, your motor neurons, this is happening through your brain. It looks like that it's like the arm that is doing the movements, the feet. When we walk, we think it's our feet that are dictating our walking, when in fact it's actually your brain. It's all coming from the brain. So this is why also we see that Torah has something over and above mitzvahs, because mitzvahs, while they're the limbs of the king, Torah is the essence of the king. It's the mind of the king. So with that being said, let's get into the text and see how the Alter Rebbe explains all of this. And we're still in this chapter 37 that we've been with for a while. And we're going to be continuing with this chapter for today and tomorrow. We're going to conclude it. So here we go. So the Alter Rebbe begins today, and he says, all of this talk about mitzvahs and the priority of mitzvahs, physical mitzvahs, and how great they are. How does this square with the famous teaching of the sages that Torah study is equal in weight to all the other mitzvahs? The origin of this teaching is from the Mishnah in Masachet Peah, chapter 1, Mishnah 1, where it says, Talmud Torah keneged kulam. Talmud Torah is equal in weight to all other mitzvahs. So how does this square with this idea? Like what, is it mitzvahs that's more important or Torah that's more important? So the Alter Rebbe explains this teaching that Talmud Torah is equal in measure to all the mitzvahs. That Talmud Torah really is this highest thing in a sense. It stems from the fact that Torah, what is Torah? When we learn Torah, what's affected, what parts of ourselves are engaged? So we know again that we have these 3 garments of the soul. We have the garment of thought, we have the garment of speech, and we have the garment of action. As we've already explained previously, the garment of action can be thought of as our external garment, whereas the garment of speech and thought are our internal garments. So since these internal garments, there's something a little bit more like intimate about these garments. And these are the garments that are affected when we learn Torah, are more like inner garments. Also, not only when we think about the garments, when we actually think about the makeup of the soul. So we know, again, the 10 components of the soul. There's the 3 intellectual components and then the 7 emotive components. So when we're engaged in Torah study, what is being affected is the 3 intellectual components, right? The Chochmah Bina Das. And the Chochmah Bina Das, it's specifically our animal soul, specifically the Chochmah Bina Das of the animal soul that, is made up of Klipas Noga, this husk that is, it's an impure husk which needs to be elevated. It's a type of husk that can be elevated because it's klipas noga, but nevertheless it is a klipa. And so when we engage, basically when we learn Torah study, what we're doing is we're taking our coarse animal brain and we're involving it in Torah study, and this allows for this coarse part of our brain, this animalistic part of our brain, to become encompassed within holiness. So this is in contrast to the midos, to the emotional attributes, the emotive attributes, the 7 emotive attributes. These 7 emotive attributes of the animal soul of a person are a lot stronger. They're a lot coarser than the intellect. And thus, as we've learned, when it comes to a Benoni is incapable of transforming their emotions into being holy emotions. This is just outside of our realm. We're not able to do that. To take our emotive impulses and to make ourselves impulsively feel like, wanting to do mitzvahs over and above wanting to eat chocolate and things like that. It's just not possible. We're human. This is the human condition. But when it comes to our minds are slightly more refined. So that is the advantage of Torah study, is that when we learn Torah, we're actually able to take our brains and we're actually able to encompass our minds in holiness in that moment when in those moments when we're learning Torah. And now the Alter Rebbe goes on to say that now there's another reason why we can say that there's a certain advantage to learning Torah over and above keeping mitzvahs, because the mitzvahs, so as we've explained we spoke about this in chapter 23 of Tanya already, that there's a teaching in the Tikkunei Zohar that the 248 positive commandments are the 248 limbs of the king, or organs of the king, depending on how you translate it. And so just like when we think about a person, so we think about, a person has their organs or their limbs, like the different parts of their body. And then there's the brain and the mind, which, as we know, Kabbalistically, according to Chassidus, is made up of 3 parts, Chochmah, Bina, and Das. It's incomparable when we think about the vitality that's found within the body and that's found within the brain. It's incomparable. So we spoke about this in the introduction, that it's like when we think about, you're walking, you're talking, you're doing all these things, you're touching objects, this vitality that's found in your body, it's really, where is it all coming from? Where is your sensation? Where is your mobility? Where is your volition to want to talk and walk and all that stuff? It's all coming from your brain. So everything ultimately is subservient to the brain. So the same thing when it comes to God, lahavdil, to a much, much greater degree, to an infinitely greater degree, because we're comparing ourselves to God, but obviously with God, it's a totally much greater situation there, that we think about, the mitzvahs, if we're saying that the mitzvahs are God's limbs, and then we talk about the light of God, the ultimate light of God, like the brain of God, so to speak, like the Chochmah Bina Das of the Chochmah of the Torah, which is found in the Torah. There's no comparison with them at all. So again, like we explained in the introduction, so we see that the Torah is the Chochmah of God and the mitzvahs are the limbs of God. So just like in a human being, our limbs are ultimately subservient to our minds. That's the limbs, they're receiving all of the vitality from the mind. So too, when it comes to the mitzvahs in comparison with the Torah ultimately is the ruling force. The Torah is the mind of God. And while it's true that, Torah being the mind of God, it's like when we learn Torah, are we really, really understanding God? Like, are we really grasping God fully? Because as we've explained previously, God himself is ungraspable. And the amazing thing about learning Torah that you might have experienced yourself is that the more you learn, the more you realize you just don't know. It's infinite. It's like we learn and we learn and we learn, and there's always deeper levels, and we can't actually grasp the essence of God. Nevertheless, the miracle of Torah and the amazing thing about Torah is that Torah is likened to water, which falls from a high place to a low place, and it remains the same water. So, you think about like a waterfall or a river or something like that, where the water is flowing into all different crevices and things like that, and it's the same water. So that's what Torah is like. Torah is the same idea. That Torah, well, yes, it's true. We're not, there's some people that understand Torah, some more, some that understand it less, and nobody's ultimately grasping God's chokhmah in the full sense in a certain way. On the other hand, we kind of are, because it's like any little bit of Torah that you learn, you're touching God's mind. You're touching God's wisdom. So this is an amazing gift that God gave us, is in learning of the Torah. So that's the end of the section for today. And so this is sort of like a little bit of a parentheses part of this chapter, where, this chapter again is just, there's such a big emphasis on mitzvahs, on physicality, on the point of the physical world and all that kind of stuff. And this is like just a little like conciliatory note to remind us that, with all of this being said, we need to address the fact that learning Torah does have its own place, does have its own role, and an extremely important role in Judaism. From a certain angle, we can actually even say that learning Torah is the highest thing. So we'll continue tomorrow, when we're going to go back and bring it back down to the mitzvahs, because now, we might be getting really confused and thinking like, okay, so if Torah really is so high, Torah is the mind of God, mitzvahs are just the limbs of God, where does that leave us with the mitzvahs? Why is it that the mitzvahs are so important? And how do we reconcile all of this? So stay tuned for that, and we'll address this tomorrow, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.